Okay, this is where we left off. Talking a little bit about whitetails, and they're susceptible to all kinds of things. You remember some of this. We said that in Ohio, they are everywhere. Every single county in Ohio, every corner of the state. So the question I have for you is, where are they in the U.S.? Are they everywhere? Talk at your table. What do you think? You think they're coast to coast? Nationwide?
I think they're everywhere.
Not quite everywhere. So, they are predominantly an eastern species, as you might suspect by the name eastern white-tailed deer. This is nice. This is a map, and I'm trying to remember. I had the URL on there, and it got obscured. It's basically a hunting organization. It's not like BigBucks.com, but it's something along those lines. And they took information. So in Ohio, we have the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife. Tracks deer statistics, issues hunting licenses, biologists back at the division, and I worked for the Division of Wildlife in the fisheries section. But, I mean, there are actually deer biologists. I'm going to photobomb your screenshot there. There are deer biologists sitting in offices in Akron and Columbus and I think Findlay. There are 5 regional offices, literally computing data on deer populations. Every year they crunch the numbers and they come up with estimates. And they come up with density estimates, and that's how they set the bag limits. This organization took information from ODNR and their counterparts in a bunch of other states. So, there are similar people doing the same stuff in Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, North Dakota, Minnesota, you name it. You can grow up and get a master's degree in biology and go to work for state government counting deer, which actually isn't a terrible job. And the wildlife biologists I worked with at ODNR were a pretty cool bunch. They took information from and compiled it into this map. And what you're seeing is the abundance and the range of the white-tailed deer in North America. So like I said, they're an eastern species. Note that you do not find whitetails in California, Nevada, most of Oregon, the southern part of Idaho. They kind of are here. White means that they're absent, or there's, it's an urban population. They can't estimate the population, urban area. Green means you're looking at less than 15. Oh, and the units didn't show up on there either. That's 15 deer per square mile. So green, there are deer, there are, sustainable populations, breeding populations, but they're not overly crowded, we wouldn't think. Yellow, 15 to 30 deer per square mile. I think it's square mile. I'm going to have to look that up again. It's got to be. Orange, 30 to 45. And red is deer like lice. Red areas are just a plague of deer. I mean, think about, any story you've seen about like a plague of grasshoppers, a plague of locusts eating everything in their path. Those red areas are incredible deer populations, high density deer populations. Lots and lots and lots and lots of deer per square mile. So you notice that in Ohio, if we zoom in a little bit, and what I like is having this map next to this map. This is actually the map from ODNR's website. Where are deer more populous in Ohio? Northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast. Southeast. Southeast Ohio, southeast portion of Ohio is where we have higher density of deer. So density is the number per a unit of area. You know that, I think, I hope. What's different? Who here has traveled outside of Columbiana County in their lives? Okay, so keep them up. We're gonna do survey style here. Never ever.
No,
okay, thank you. Have you driven north on Route 7? Have you driven north on Route 7? Keep them up. Have you gone north of Youngstown on Route 7? Good. Anybody gone all the way to Lake Erie? Straight up 11 or 7? Okay, what's different about here from there? You can put them down for a minute. I'll give you a break. Flatter, yeah. There was this, my dad used to joke that there was a giant ice cube that stopped in Fairfield Township, and it's true. Glaciers really flattened the northern part of Ohio. We have glacial till soils, we have remnant, we have what are called glacial erratics, which are rocks that come from Canada that got shoved down here by the giant ice cube, and you find them in farm fields. They're really cool. The northern part of Ohio is much flatter. Who here has driven south on 79 or south down along the river down towards Marietta? Anybody been to Athens, that part of the county? Okay, pretty part of the state. What's different there than here? We think we're hilly. Compare us to most of Mahoning County, and we're rolling hills. Compare us to down around Athens or Marietta. We look pretty darn flat. They got some real hills down there. We call that the unglaciated portion of Ohio. So I'm going to do a little box here. Unglaciated. The ice cube didn't roll over that part of Ohio. So you have more terrain. It's harder. What's it harder to do in that kind of terrain? Farm. Harder to do a lot of things. Harder to walk. It is much harder to farm those big hills than it is on relatively flatter ground. That unglaciated portion of Ohio also tends to have a bigger mix of habitat types. You've got wooded hillsides, you've got open valleys. It's interesting. Also, lower population density of humans down there, less developed, less urban. That's where we see our biggest concentration of deer. Now, Ohio Division of Wildlife goes into a little bit more detail than the national map, and they show that northeast Ohio, so that's Mahoning and Trumbull County up towards Cleveland, has more deer than if we go out here in the western part of the state. Has anybody here been to Cedar Point? Okay. I hate driving to Sandusky. I would like to be sedated and put in the back seat on a nice nest of pillows. I don't want to drive to Sandusky. Who has driven to Sandusky? Oh, dear God, please, hit me in the head with a brick. Let me pass out and put me in the back of a station wagon, and I will wake me up when we get there. Why do I hate driving to Sandusky? Oh, God, why do I hate driving to Sandusky? I haven't driven to Sandusky in years because I hate it. What's it look like out there? Oh, God, what's it look like? It's flat. It is so flat. It is so stinking flat. It's flatter than a lab table. It's horrible. It is just big ditches and flat, 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 flat. It is so flat and boring. I hate driving to Sandusky. Ugh. Big ditches and flat fields. It used to be a swamp. They drained it all. It was the Great Black Swamp of Ohio. They drained the whole darn thing, killed all the wildlife in it, and put a bunch of ditches and agricultural tile and started farming it. Woohoo! Go Ohio. It's not as good a habitat as this unglaciated portion. And here, where we're at, we kind of straddle the line. We're kind of on the edge of the rolling hills. You go south, it starts to roll. You go north, it gets pretty flat pretty fast. We're in a great zone. It's mixed. And this whole area in the northeast kind of looks like that. Terrain matters. Habitat matters. The kind of animals you find there and how successful they are depend on the world around them. Okay. So, no, whitetail deer are not everywhere in the country. Now, there are actually other species of deer that live out west. Anybody know one? You've gone out west hunting, right?
Yeah.
Have you gone out west hunting?
No, not out west.
Okay. Do you know what the deer are out there?
Mule deer.
Mule deer. You get into Arizona and New Mexico and the deserts, California, and you start to see mule deer. Now, I don't know if they're an otocoilus species. I think they're actually a different genus. I'd have to look it up. But they look a little different physiologically. If we did DNA comparisons, I don't know how much DNA they share. But there are other species. There's also another species that I'm almost positive is in the genus Otocoilus in the Florida Keys. They're called Keys deer. And they're about this big. They're so cute. And you can walk right up and pet them. They're ridiculously tame. And I do have a film. We're not going to have a chance to watch it, but it's we'll see a snippet of it later in the year. And they show baby key deer, which are like this big. But there are other species of deer in North America. This is the only species of deer we have in Ohio, is the eastern whitetail. I asked you what you thought had happened to the deer population in the last 100 years. How has the deer population in the last 100 years changed? Some of you said yes. Twitch, twitch, twitch. As it stands, now, can they count all the deer in Ohio? Those wildlife biologists, bless their hearts, good people though they are, do not go out and tag and count all the deer in Ohio. They estimate the population based on hunting tags. When you check your deer in, and for those of you who don't hunt, anybody want to describe the process? You kill an animal, you tear your license, right? And you have to go to a tagging station and register your animal.
You can do it online.
Really? Man, that's cool. Okay, you used to have to go to a hardware store or the convenience store in Negley or any other deer check station. So now apparently we're in the 21st century and you can do it online. From those numbers of animals harvested, killed, whatever you want to call it, biologists estimate the population. And currently they estimate that there are about 700,000 deer in the state of Ohio. It's a lot of deer. It's fewer deer than we have people, but it's a lot of deer. Now, deer were actually extirpated from Ohio in 1909. We're going to talk a little bit about Ohio history. Anybody, you looked up the word extirpated. What does it mean? Do you remember? No?
It's where the species in that area, in one area, goes extinct.
Yes. It's where a species is completely killed off in a very specific area. So they're not extinct everywhere, but made extinct in one area. So as of 1909, there were no deer in Ohio. None. Not a one. What happened to them? We gleefully killed them all. And when I say we gleefully killed them all, we didn't have regulated hunting seasons when European settlers came into North America. There were no hunting seasons. It was a free-for-all. Kill whatever you want, whenever you want, as many as you want. And again, to reference the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, because I love them and they're such good history, Pa, her father, he moves the family repeatedly. So they moved from the woods of big woods of Wisconsin out to the Oklahoma Territory, back to Minnesota, out to North Dakota. And a lot of his moves are based on the fact that game is getting scarce. So in the big woods of Wisconsin, he wants to move the family west because game is getting scarce. It's getting too settled. Their version of settled is probably lower density occupation than Columbiana County today. I'll see you later, Preston. But, game is getting scarce. We did a really good job of killing everything. Sometimes accidentally, just because we had mouths to feed and coats to make and buffalo robes to make for sleighs, and sometimes very intentionally. So with a lot of predator species, the killing was very intentional. In Ohio, in, I want to say the 1870s? Maybe it was pre-Civil War. There was the Great Hinckley Hunt, where basically all the men from the township made a large circle and began working inward, chasing every animal in front of them and killing them all. All of them. Wolves, bobcats, any animal they saw, they killed. And it ended with a giant pile of carcasses on which buzzards came to feed. And the buzzard day in Hinckley actually relates less to the migratory patterns of buzzards and more to the Great Hinckley Hunt. So you can look that one up online. It's a horrifying story. So there were no deer in Ohio around the turn of the last century. They were gone. We killed them all. In the 1920s, they began a restocking program. So they basically went to other states that still had deer populations and said, we would like to capture deer from your area and bring them to Ohio and let them loose in the wild. You cool with that? Can we borrow a few deer from you? And I'm not sure where the deer came from. I'm guessing West Virginia and Pennsylvania, because I don't think deer were actually extirpated in either of those states. Partly because the terrain it's easier for deer to hide out in remnant populations. Remnant meaning left behind, little chunks that didn't get killed. In the 1920s, we start restocking, and I think it's in the 1940s that there are enough deer to actually have a hunting season for the first time in 30 years. There are more deer in Ohio than there have ever been. There are probably more deer in Ohio than there were when the first European settlers arrived, actually. So if you look at how the deer population changed in the last 100 years, 100 years ago there weren't any deer in Ohio. There were 0 deer. How many deer did you count on your way to school this morning from a bus or a moving vehicle? My count was 6 this morning. 4 of them were like off on a hillside, but I saw them. 3, okay. We pretty much take that for granted. My dad was a farm boy from Columbiana County, Ohio. He grew up right up there near Crestview High School. And he talks about, in the 1950s, it being a drop everything you're doing, everybody out of the house, oh my gosh, there are deer. And it happened once or twice. It was a huge deal to see a deer. They were very uncommon. It was literally, everybody drop what you're doing, stop what you're doing, come out, look. Anybody stop what they're doing to watch deer when they come across the yard? No. Hey, there are deer out there. They are really abundant in Ohio. They've done well. There are probably more deer now than there were when the first European settlers got here. Does that seem logical to you? That seems weird, doesn't it? That seems really weird. That can't be right, Moser. You're insane. I knew she was crazy. She is. I keep telling you she's nuts. They are more abundant now than they have ever been before. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So does that strike, do you know what cognitive dissonance is? Okay. How do you like this blue floor? I think it is the prettiest color of blue I've ever seen. Do you like it? Do you like blue? I love blue. I love this blue floor. Gavin!
That's gray, not blue.
Okay, that's cognitive dissonance. I'm telling you something that doesn't jive with what you know. When you hear something that doesn't jive with what you know, little bells should start going off in your head. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. I'm going to put in my pitch now for being better informed pain in the butt adults and citizens and human beings. I like pains in the butt. Be the person who goes, no, wait a minute, where'd you get those facts? Okay, wait. Well, why did you say that? Well, how about that? Well, why is that? Be a pain in the butt. Some of you are really good at it. It's like your superpower. Cognitive dissonance is when something just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right to most of us that there are more deer in the state of Ohio now than there were when European settlers got here. It doesn't sound right to me. As we go through this, when something sets off a little bell and you're like, okay, I don't know that I believe you about that, Moser, jot it down in your notes. Because one thing we're going to build into this unit is when there are things that seem weird or that maybe aren't easy to understand, we're going to make some questions. And some of them are ones that I can easily point to answers to, and some of them are ones I don't know the answers to, but they're setting off my bells. Like, well, how does that work? What are they saying? So we're gonna start that. Okay, so we're going to, for now, take at face value, but maybe question and be a pain in the butt about the fact that more deer now than there used to be. Division of Natural Resources, or Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife, manages the deer. And when we say they're managing a population, they're looking at how many deer they want to live in Ohio and how do they get the population size as close to that number as possible. So I talked with a few folks yesterday about what the bag limits were this year in Columbiana County. It's 3, apparently. A couple years ago, it was 6. That was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I think. I remember a young man I had in class that year who said to me, you know, hunting season ends tomorrow, Moser. I said, yeah. He wasn't particularly academically motivated, but that's okay. He was in like environmental science. And I said, yeah, it does. Huh? And he said, yep. You know, I got 5 deer this year. I said, oh, good for you. And he said, we eat a lot of venison. Good, it's delicious. He said, you know the bag limit's 6, right? I said, I had heard that. He said, I think I'm going to be sick tomorrow. Okay, you pretty much just told me you're skipping school to go deer hunting, but I'm not going to put the dots together. It's okay. I don't know if he got a 6 or not. He didn't tell me anymore. The bag limits are set based on population levels, based on how many deer they want out of the population. And we'll talk more later about, is it better to remove, and I'll put this in the most graphic terms possible, is it better to remove a uterus or a pair of testicles from a population control perspective? Good question. Deer. Okay, what are other questions you've got? So the big question I have is, why so many deer now? How could there be more deer now than there were when European settlers arrived in this part of the country? What are other questions you've got? Talk at your table. Is there anything that makes you go, wait. The question was, you know, in places where the deer are just so thick they're like rats, are they totally acclimated to humans? And does that mean that people aren't hunting them? Are people hunting them and they're still that, like, yeah, whatever, humans? I don't think there's a lack of deer hunting in West Virginia. I don't have any statistics to back that up, but that's just my hunch. Has anybody here gone deer hunting in West Virginia? Looking at this map, I would want to cross the river. So, I mean, dense. You've never been to West Virginia?
I have a farm.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you haven't been to West Virginia, I'm going to assign homework. It'll only take you like 20 minutes. But it'll take you 50 cents to cross the Newell Bridge. So there's a place I used to go backpacking a lot down in West Virginia, and we would always comment that when we would leave, we could usually count 30 deer in the first 2 miles coming from the trailhead. You know, you would see just hillsides covered in deer. I mean, like rats. We did have a deer literally walk into our campsite as we were preparing dinner, like within a few feet of us, just kind of stand there, doing her thing. Young female. It was in a national forest. It was in the Monongahela National Forest. I know it's a hunting area. It's posted for hunting. We don't backpack there during hunting season. And yet, she was probably 6 feet away from me. We're sitting on a log eating dinner, and she just wanders right in and is chewing on vegetation. So, you know, why don't they why aren't they afraid? Are they less afraid? That's probably a question that there's research for. I don't know. Okay, what are other questions people have? So that would be deer acclimated to humans in dense areas. What are some other questions? You got some good ones. What else you got? Other questions about deer? Where they are? Yeah.
Like in the ones with like in areas with a lot of deer.
Oh yeah. Who said they had hunted in West Virginia? Isaiah, and you have. What was your bag limit? Now out of state's probably different than in state. No, really? Okay. What was? Do you remember what it was?
I think it was 4.
4.
When I went, it's been like 6 years or so.
Okay.
It was 3 doe and 1
Okay, 3 doe and 1 buck. Okay. Isaiah, do you happen to remember?
I think it was
Okay.
and
All right.
They do like it's like kind of like Ohio for like waterfowl. They have different. They have the eastern
Well,
zone.
yes, they have zones, and most states do. And if you look at that map of West Virginia, let me get rid of some of my big circles here. You'll notice that, you know, this area looks pretty different in population density than this area. So southern West Virginia looks like it has lower density deer population. where northern West Virginia has much higher density. And I would have to like overlay a map of national forests. Most of the Monongahela National Forest is in this area. There are some far south, but like in here is probably mostly Monongahela National. And that's a pretty large tract of preserved public land. And it's multi-purpose, so you can hike, hunt, fish, camp, shoot, ATV, do all kinds of things there. But it's pretty high deer density. And yeah, typically those wildlife biologists are looking at population numbers, and we're going to talk more about carrying capacity as we go. They're looking at how many deer do we have, how many deer do we want? Do we want the population to go up? Do we want the population to go down? Are we at a good level where we want it to stay kind of steady? And then you control that through bag limits in various areas. So yeah, good question. Okay, other questions about deer. Oh dear, my deers. Ha, see? Appropriate there. Ha.
Way she used it.
I don't care. Okay, other questions? Do we have anything in here? No. Okay. So, what I'm going to have you do is cool your heels for about 10 minutes. I'm going to write a quick recall quiz. I'm going to finish writing my recall quiz on deer. Then you're going to take it. And then tomorrow we are going to meet our next character, who is, do you remember? Mice. Adorable little mice. Oh, no, it's ticks. I'm sorry. Next character's ticks. Ticky, 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 ticky. Okay.